When I left my family ranch for what I thought would be just a few months, I never imagined I'd come back to find 138 brand new homes standing where my cattle used to graze. It felt like stepping into a nightmare. Rows of neatly built houses, driveways and streetlights, all on land that had been in my family for generations. No calls, no emails, no permission. Just bulldozers, blueprints, and an HOA that somehow thought they had every right to take over. It started out with a neighbor mentioning that some new development was going up nearby. At first, I didn't think much of it. Land out here gets bought and sold all the time. But when I drove down the old dirt road that led to my property, something didn't feel right. And then, there it was. Fences gone, trees cleared, and homes halfway done. I couldn't even recognize my own land. I tried to stay calm. I contacted the HOA responsible, thinking maybe this was some crazy paperwork mistake. But instead of an apology, I got pushback. They claimed they'd bought rights from a development company, a company I'd never even heard of. And that's when the real digging began. The paper trail, the shady deals, and how a development company managed to get involved without a single signature from me. Turns out things weren't just messy, they were illegal. And when the development company found out that the HOA had jumped the gun and started building before the deal was even finalized, they weren't happy. In fact, they sued. Now I'm caught in the middle of a legal mess that keeps unfolding, deeper and darker than I ever expected. How did this happen? Who's really to blame? And what happens next? You won't believe how far this story goes. Before I left, I made sure everything was in order. Property taxes paid, land boundaries marked, even had a caretaker check in every few weeks. My ranch wasn't for sale, and there weren't any plans to develop it. So you can imagine the shock when I found out a homeowners association I'd never even heard of was claiming control over it. No letters, no warnings, no communication, just construction crews and model homes. I started asking around. Neighbors told me the construction had started a few months after I left, and that the workers were in a rush from day one. It was like they were trying to finish as much as possible before someone noticed. That raised a red flag. Who builds 138 homes without making sure they have all the legal clearances first? Digging into county records, I found a development company's name listed next to mine on some new zoning documents, but I never signed anything. Turns out someone had filed documents that suggested I'd agreed to sell a big chunk of my land. Only problem? The signature wasn't mine, and the timeline didn't add up. Things were moving too fast. It was like the HOA and the developers were working off a handshake deal that nobody bothered to double-check. When I confronted the HOA again, they were suddenly a lot less confident. That's when I got the first email from the development company's legal team. They were suing the HOA for breach of contract, claiming the construction had gone way beyond what was agreed. But the craziest part? That agreement was based on forged documents, the same ones tied to my property. At this point, I knew I wasn't just dealing with some shady paperwork. There was something bigger going on, and somehow, my family's land had become the center of it all. And I still hadn't figured out who had the most to gain from it, or how far they were willing to go. After that email from the development company's legal team, things escalated fast. I started getting calls from lawyers, surveyors, even a couple of real estate agents who were suddenly very interested in my land. Everyone had questions, but no one had answers, or at least, not the kind that made sense. The HOA kept insisting they had legal permission to build, but every time I asked to see the original sale agreement, they dodged the question. Something wasn't adding up. I found out the HOA president, a guy named Mark Ellison, used to work in real estate before taking over the association. From what I could gather, he had connections with the developers and may have played a big role in getting the project pushed through. Neighbors told me he'd been talking for months about revitalizing the area and bringing in more value to the community. But at what cost? And who gave him the authority to build on land that didn't belong to him? Meanwhile, I discovered that the forged documents weren't just limited to the zoning filings. There were building permits, land surveys, even a fake lease agreement with a phony signature that looked almost identical to mine. Someone had gone to great lengths to make this look official. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just some paperwork mistake, it was a coordinated effort. To make things worse, the development company started turning on the HOA. Their lawyers claimed they had been misled, that Mark and his team had promised ownership of the land and rushed the deal through without waiting for proper clearances. But the development company wasn't clean either. Turns out, they'd already started pre-selling the homes, advertising peaceful ranch living on lots they technically didn't even own. As this tangled web kept growing, I couldn't help but wonder, who was really pulling the strings? And if so many people were involved, how far were they willing to go to keep this covered up? The more I uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. And I had a feeling the worst was still ahead. That's when things started getting personal. I began receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox. No return address, just vague warnings like, "Let it go," and "You're in over your head." One night, I noticed a truck parked across from the ranch gate, engine running but lights off. By the time I walked out with a flashlight, it sped off. I couldn't prove anything, but it was clear someone didn't want me asking questions anymore. The deeper I pushed, the more aggressive everything got. My emails to the county zoning office stopped getting responses. The title company I hired said some of the records had been temporarily sealed for review, which I'd never heard of happening before. It was like roadblock after roadblock, and the only thing that was becoming more obvious was how many people might have had a hand in this mess. I managed to track down a former employee of the development company, someone who had worked in their planning department. She didn't want to talk at first, but after I showed her the forged documents with my name on them, her face changed. She admitted that the deal had been rushed and shady, but told me it went even deeper than just one bad project. There were other landowners who'd had parts of their property rezoned without full knowledge, and in at least 2 cases, they'd been pressured to sell after the fact. At that point, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my land. This was part of something bigger, a pattern, maybe even a scheme to fast-track development projects by cutting corners and burying the truth under stacks of paperwork and false signatures. The development company was still going after the HOA, but neither of them was backing down. Meanwhile, I was still caught in the middle with no clear path forward. Then came the subpoena. I was being pulled into the lawsuit, not just as a witness, but as a potential claimant. The courtroom battle was getting closer, and tensions on all sides were heating up. And just when I thought it couldn't get more twisted, a new name surfaced. One I hadn't expected at all. The name that popped up in the latest round of court. Filings stopped me cold. My cousin, Jake. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since a falling out over some minor family disagreement. Nothing serious, or so I thought. But there it was, plain as day. Jake's name listed as a consultant for the development company, tied to a quiet land transfer agreement that supposedly gave them partial rights to begin early construction. I couldn't believe it. Someone from my own family had been involved behind my back. I went through old messages, emails, anything that might explain how Jake got wrapped up in this. Turns out, while I was away, he'd been telling people around town that I was thinking about selling off the land. He even mentioned he might be handling things on my behalf. That was a complete lie. I never gave him, or anyone, that kind of authority. But that false rumor may have been all the developers needed to justify fast-tracking their project. Now the betrayal wasn't just corporate, it was personal. And the timing made everything feel intentional. Jake had been struggling with debt, and from what I could piece together, he'd been paid off under the table. A quiet payout for quiet paperwork. It made me sick. But what made it worse was that the HOA and the development company were now pointing fingers at each other, and at Jake, claiming they had no idea the original land rights were disputed. Meanwhile, the construction hadn't stopped. More. Homes were going up. Families were starting to move in. These weren't just empty lots anymore. These were real people, unknowingly settling onto a ranch built on a lie. And every passing day made the situation harder to untangle. I stood there, watching workers pour concrete where my grandfather's barn once stood, and I knew things were about to come to a head. The lawsuit was heating up. The courtroom dates were getting closer, and now with Jake involved, everything I thought I knew about this fight was turned upside down. And then, right when I thought I'd seen the worst, another document landed on my doorstep. One that could change everything. The document that showed up at my doorstep looked official. Heavy envelope, courthouse seal, return address from the county clerk's office. I opened it, expecting more legal threats or court dates. But instead, it was a sworn deposition from a whistleblower, someone deep inside the development company. And what it revealed changed everything. According to the statement, the project had been fast-tracked using a falsified land valuation report. Not only had they forged my signature, but they'd also submitted a fake appraisal that claimed my ranch was already subdivided and approved for housing. That fake report had been the foundation for securing construction permits, investor backing, and even marketing materials. Everything, the land rights, the zoning, the HOA agreement, was built on a lie. The whistleblower also confirmed that Jake was paid to act as a proxy. He never had ownership of the land, but he was used to create the illusion of consent. The development company knew it was risky, but they were banking on speed and silence. The HOA, they'd been misled too, but instead of stopping when red flags appeared, they kept building, hoping to push the project past the point of no return. Once the deposition hit the courtroom, things moved quickly. The judge froze all construction. Investigations opened up. The development company tried to settle quietly, offering me a payout to keep things from going public. But I refused. I wasn't going to sell out my family's land, not after everything they'd done. In court, the forged documents unraveled the case. The HOA was hit with penalties. The development company faced lawsuits from angry homebuyers. And Jake? He disappeared. No one's heard from him since the verdict. But just when I thought it was over, I got a call from a local reporter. She'd been following the case and uncovered something strange. The same development company had used a nearly identical strategy on a different ranch, in another state. Same forged reports. Same fake signatures. Same story, different names. That's when I realized my story might have ended in court, but this was just the tip of something much bigger. After everything unraveled, the ranch finally felt quiet again. The construction site was shut down. Fences went back up, and I stood there watching the wind blow across the open fields, like the land had been holding its breath this whole time. I ended up working with the county to have the fraudulent zoning reversed and the permits officially voided. It took months, but little by little things started getting back to the way they were. The HOA was dissolved shortly after the court ruling. A few homeowners who had already moved in were relocated through a separate legal settlement. It wasn't their fault, and I never blamed them. They were just caught in the middle like I was. Some even reached out to apologize, which honestly meant more than I expected. As for Jake, no one really knows where he went. There were rumors that he left the state, that he got scared, maybe even that he tried the same scheme somewhere else. But I chose not to chase him. I figured the damage had already been done, and in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about getting the truth out and protecting what mattered. The biggest thing I learned through all this is how quickly trust can be broken when money and power get involved. My family's land, something I always thought was safe, nearly slipped away in a stack of forged papers and backdoor deals. But I also learned that speaking up, even when it's hard, matters more than people think. So now I'm back where I started, rebuilding slowly, making sure every corner of this ranch stays in the right hands. Because this land tells a story. And now, thanks to everything that happened, it's one I'll never stop protecting.